This Saturday, the top two teams in the Big Ten East, in the Michigan State Spartans and the Ohio State Buckeyes, will meet in Columbus. This game will be televised at noon Eastern Time on ABC with Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit. Ohio State is given an 86.3% chance to win this matchup of biblical proportions. This game, Michigan State hasn't been ranked this high since 2015, and the last time they entered in Columbus as an underdog when both teams were in the top 10 was 2015. A game Michigan State had no business winning, but with rain, toughness, they came out and won it 17-14. Yet, despite all these things, mainly because of how the teams have been playing this year, Ohio State is favored by 19 points to win. Today I'm going to be breaking down the rosters of each team, comparing them side by side, giving my thoughts and opinions on both of these teams, and at the end of the video, like always, giving my prediction. If you are new to this channel, consider giving a like, hitting that subscribe button, clicking on that notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video and on this highly anticipated matchup below. I'm going to be giving a giveaway, or having one rather, soon. So stay tuned for that. But anyway, let's get into this. So Michigan State and Ohio State, obviously, the top two teams in the East here. Both, they do have prolific offenses for what we expected. I mean, honestly, Ohio State's offense just continues reaching new heights. They score 46.3 points per game. Michigan State's offense is something else, 34.6 points per game, led by Peyton Thorne and Kenneth Walker III and Jaden Reed. Ohio State, you obviously have Stroud, but more importantly, you have Jackson Smith and Jigba, their leading wide receiver, along with wide receivers Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and Trevion Henderson out of that backfield. Both defenses are not these teams' strong points whatsoever. Both allow slightly over 20 points per game. Ohio State 20.2, Michigan State 22.5. And their defenses struggle more with the pass than they do the run. So this matchup, looking just at the stats and even looking at how these two teams play, I'm expecting a lot of points. A lot of points to be scored in this matchup. Let's get it kicked off and start with the QB position. You have C.J. Stroud and you have Peyton Thorne. C.J. Stroud has passed for 3,036 yards, completes 68.8% of his passes, averages 9.8 yards per pass, has 30 passing touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He's been sacked 7 times. Altogether, he has a 179.4 passer rating. Peyton Thorne, on the other hand, is 2,460 passing yards, completes 63.4% of his passes, averages 9 yards per pass, 21 touchdowns, 8 picks. He's been sacked 16 times. He has a 158.6 passer rating. Watching these quarterbacks, they both do not always play well, just like any other quarterback under pressure. Thorne has shown some mobility along with Stroud, though Thorne is often called more to run than Stroud is. Stroud normally just sits comfortably in the pocket and executes well on his throws. I do have to give Stroud the edge here. And granted, yes, he has a better O-line to protect him and better wide receivers. But while Thorne has made critical mistakes in, big games, many of them, there's only been really one game where I can say that C.J. Stroud made a critical mistake. like an absolutely critical one. And that was the Oregon game, and you could probably also count the Nebraska game. Thorne has had several more instances where he has made mistakes, whether that is due to him or his O-line and just lack of protection is certainly up for debate, though. But I think that Stroud is the better QB, and that Ohio State does have better QB depth to call on if, say, their starter does get injured. The offensive line, I would not say, is much of a question. I think that, Thorne being sacked for nearly double the times Stroud has been, 16-7, and the fact that despite that I think Kenneth Walker is the better running back here, that Trevion Henderson averages 7.3 yards per carry compared to Walker's 6.5. Ohio State's O-line can just block better in both instances. They don't really allow their QB to get pressured. I mean, there are always bad days and such. But another example, too, is, Michigan State. They have one O-line guy get injured, or even if their O-line is just stable, they constantly have to shuffle guys around at the offensive line position because, let's be fair here, they're not a good O-line. And they have to scheme it differently and play in a different way that isn't normal to hide some of their weaknesses at the offensive line position. So Ohio State also gets the nod at the line. But as I said, Michigan State here has a weapon. Kenneth Walker III is probably one of the best, if not the best, running back in the country overall, with 1,473 rushing yards, 6.5 yards per carry, and 17 rushing touchdowns. The guy's something else. An amazing athlete, is shifty, yet has shown instances of power as well. Transfer 2, just to remind everyone how, Michigan State there wasn't much expected of them before this year. I didn't even expect much of them either. And through the transfer portal, Mel Tucker has built a team who started off as an island of misfit toys is now second in the Big Ten East. It's quite remarkable. But Kenneth Walker, again, backup Jordan Simmons, has 232 rushing yards, about 5 yards per carry. No touchdowns, though. Thorne has had 3 rushing touchdowns, 150 yards on the ground as well. You go over to Ohio State, and Trevion Henderson might be the best running back in the country when it comes to open space. He finds a hole, he's gone. 1,300 rushing yards, 7.3 yards a carry, 14 rushing touchdowns. Unlike Michigan State, Ohio State has multiple backs who are reliable that they can call on. Mayan Williams with 435 rushing yards, about the same average per carry that Henderson has, and 2 touchdowns. Probably one of the best backs in the country as well. Ohio State has a loaded running back room. Master Teague is not at the same caliber that Williams and Henderson is, but with 5.6 yards per carry, 253 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns, he's kind of built like a power back. And behind that O-line, he can certainly pick up much needed yards. Michigan State, I would say, takes the pot of gold. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Kenneth Walker III, as examples in the Michigan game, Kenneth Walker is a running back who can win you games on his own, which is not it's not common at all. That's normally you think of a quarterback who can win you games because he's that key player, the guy that everyone looks to, the leader on the offense. Kenneth Walker is that guy. He's not a quarterback. He's a running back. So Ohio State, listen, they have the better running back depth, and because of the O-line, they might have the better rushing day. But Kenneth Walker III, I would say, just from what I have seen, even with the bad O-line, he still plays amazing. And I'm going to have to give Walker that edge over Henderson. For the receiving end of things, you have Jackson Smith and Jigba for Ohio State, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jeremy Ruckert. However, Michigan State does have a great wide receiver core. Jaden Reed, Jalen Naylor, who has been injured but might appear in this game. I don't necessarily know. And then you also got Trey Mosley as well, and Connor Hayward, converted from running back to tight end, has also seen some activity in unique play calls, and he can come in clutch as well. So Michigan State, you can make the debate that they have the second best wide receiver core in the Big Ten. I mean, just like I was talking about with the QB for Michigan State versus Ohio State, there are other factors besides stats. You got to watch the games. A quarterback might have worse stats than the other, but he might be better. It's just because he doesn't have a supporting cast. It's hard to compare players sometimes just on their own because, the different teams are teams. They're not led by one individual. But Michigan State does have a great wide receiver core, especially compared to what I thought they would be. Jaden Reed leads Michigan State with 829 receiving yards, 18.4 yards per catch, and 7 touchdowns. Naylor has 587 receiving yards, 18.9 yards per catch, and 6 receiving touchdowns. Trey Mosley has 417 receiving yards, 14.9 yards per catch, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Hayward has 1 touchdown, about 10 yards per reception, and 200 yards. Michigan State's receiver core, what they love to do is burn you deep, and Hayward's kind of the guy that you don't always pay attention to until he has the ball and has converted the first down. But Michigan State loves to take deep shots, and they are very good at their deep shots. And I mean, they try the flea flicker basically every game. And more often than not, it does indeed work. You compare it to Ohio State, though, and listen, Michigan State's are great. No one matches up with Ohio State's wide receiver core. They are led by Jackson Smith and Jigba, who has 1,027 receiving yards, 17.4 yards per reception, and 5 receiving touchdowns. Garrett Wilson has 813 receiving yards, 15.3 yards per reception, and 9 receiving touchdowns. Olave with 708 yards, 13.9 yards per reception, and 11 total touchdowns. And Ruckert with 256 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. Henderson, who's the running back, has over 200 receiving yards and also has 3 touchdowns through the air. So that's just, honestly, that perfectly sums up Ohio State's receiving game. 32 total receiving touchdowns, an average of 14.6 yards per completed reception. It's insanity. That is the definition of intimidating. And Michigan State's numbers are pretty similar, at least for yards per completed pass, 14.1 yards per average reception. You got 21 receiving touchdowns, 2,518 total passing yards. Michigan State, for just everything from what I see, they want to run Ohio State's model. They have tempo at moments. They can pass the ball deep. They can run very well. I mean, they're trying to imitate the best of the best so that they can eventually beat Ohio State. That shows good coaching. The only difference is they have limited depth. They don't, again, who cares if Peyton Thorne is somehow better than C.J. Stroud? He doesn't have the O-line Stroud does. So when he faces Ohio State's D-line, which we're going to get to in a little later, it's going to get very tricky to do much of anything to at least keep up with Ohio State. So there's so many different factors. But Michigan State, Ohio State here takes the cake with the wide receiver room, both with depth and explosive players. The only edge you could give to Michigan State is Jaden Reed returning punts, and he hasn't returned a punt for a touchdown in a while. I think his last one was against Nebraska or Western Kentucky, maybe. But anyway, all in all on offense, Ohio State takes it with depth at every position. And if we're talking about just top players, Ohio State takes it at every position but running back. I have to give it to Kenneth Walker, and I think unless he gets shut down in these next two games, he certainly deserves the Heisman Trophy. Saying this as a Michigan fan who, he destroyed us. And I hate it, but it's reality. And for defense is a little different. And by different, I mean in the sense that it just is. Because while on offense, there were some discrepancies between these two teams, per se. Like, they're similar in a lot of ways, but Ohio State has this, dominant O-line that Michigan State doesn't necessarily have. And then Ohio State also has a lot more depth here. You go to the defense, and these two teams are even more, I would say, similar on defense. Now, Michigan State, statistically, they are far weaker at defending the pass. These two teams are about equal at defending the run. Ohio State here, I think they lead the nation in sacks with 33. Michigan State has 32. That's right, 32 total sacks. So these D-lines dominant at getting pressure. Now, we have seen in the example of Michigan State, they never got to Michigan once. So I don't know how they'll do against Ohio State's O-line, but against every other team, Michigan State has wreaked havoc in the backfield with their D-line. And they defended Michigan's run game very well, so we could see something similar to that. Michigan State here, their leaders in sacks are Jeff Pietrowski, the defensive end, with 5.5, and he shares that number with Jacob Panashuk, who also has 5.5. Both have one forced fumble and a fumble recovery. Pietrowski actually has 2 forced fumbles. Panashuk has 2 passes defended. Xavier Henderson, the safety, has 3 sacks, 2 passes defended, and 1 pick and a forced fumble. Simeon Barrow and Drew Beasley, a defensive tackle and end, respectively, share 2.5 sacks, 1 pass defended, and Burrow has 1 forced fumble. Henderson is one of the best players on Michigan State's defense. He also leads in total tackles with 82, and he is tied leading with interceptions with 1. Outside of him, though, the secondary is not much. And Michigan State's linebackers are also good too. Noah Harvey is one name just to mention. And then you also have Cal Halliday, who has 2 passes defended, 64 total tackles, and a pick 6, a forced fumble and fumble recovery. But outside of, their front 7, Michigan State has a very weak pass defense. And there's the bend but not break aspect, where their pass defense looks more atrocious than it is. It's still very atrocious. Absolutely. You look at the Purdue game, 500 pass yards allowed. Michigan State couldn't stop the pass. You look at the Michigan game, and if Jim Harbaugh wasn't so stubborn with play calling, the 16-point lead would have turned into 23, 30, maybe 37, but I'm not going there. Because again, Michigan State couldn't stop the pass. It was a combination of Michigan State realizing Michigan has stubborn play calling, we're going to take advantage of it. And that's to go back to the fact that even though they struggle defending the pass, they study you and they will take advantage of your mistakes. Michigan State will win a game if they constantly take advantage of your mistakes. But if you're mistake-free or near mistake-free, Purdue is an example. You will run through that defense like a hot knife through butter. Seriously. Like Maryland, you look at the Maryland game. Michigan State's defense, they just took advantage of mistakes, took advantage of penalties. If Maryland didn't have penalties and, all these other theoreticals, they would have been close to tying the game or winning. This is a defense that takes advantage of your mistakes. Period. Amen. And with that, we're going to check out Ohio State's defense. Ohio State's defense doesn't always, they take advantage of mistakes too, but from what I have seen with Ohio State, their strategy is, we're just going to sack you until you're just done. They lead the nation with sacks in 33. Their defensive line is beastly. And they do struggle with the pass, but whereas Michigan State's bend but not break approach has always been their theme, that isn't the case with Ohio State. Ohio State, when they were allowing 400 and 500 yards, no, they didn't like that. Ohio State wants to have a no-fly zone if they can. They absolutely want to. And they can't necessarily have that because, just some issues and, lack of returning starters, lack of depth. There have been some questions about development in their secondary, but nonetheless, here we are. Haskell Garrett leads them with 4.5 sacks. He's a defensive tackle, followed up by Tyleik Williams with 4 sacks. Jack Sawyer, Tyreek Smith, and Zach Harrison, all defensive ends. Sawyer, being a true freshman, all have 3 sacks, 1 pass defended, and at least 1 forced fumble. It's crazy. Ohio State with 11 interceptions, 6 fumble recoveries, and then you check out Michigan State, 8 fumble recoveries, 8 picks. Ohio State here is just, the more you look at it, pretty similar to Michigan State. The only difference is on defense that Ohio State doesn't want to be this way. They do also want to have this no-fly zone. They want to have better play out of their secondary, and Michigan State does as well. The difference is Michigan State doesn't have the talent to do that, and Ohio State does. They have seen improvement, though, ever since that Oregon loss. They have been an improving team. They are led by Ronnie Hickman with interceptions with 2 and total tackles with 80. Ryan Watts, the cornerback, also has 2 picks. Hickman also has a pick 6. And then you have Steele Chambers, Tommy Eichenberg, who are linebackers. Chambers has a sack, 2 passes defended, and a pick, and a forced fumble. I was just listing some names for both teams on defense. I would say that Ohio State at all positions on defense does have a slight edge. I'm not going to say it's big. And again, that's mainly because of depth. You look at the performance of these defenses, they're very similar. The only difference is Ohio State doesn't allow nearly as many yards. And part of me is thinking that that's not only because, they just have more talent, because, you look at the sack numbers, the fumble recovery numbers, the pick numbers, and even the points allowed. These defenses are very similar. They either sack you or they let you pass on them in a certain sense. But it's more so the case with Michigan State. I'm very curious to see how these defenses match with the offenses, because I'm assuming Ohio State at will, and even Michigan State at points at will be able to move these defenses. These two teams are obviously more offensively focused than they are defensively focused. So in conclusion, Michigan State, your hope is that Walker does to Ohio State what he did to Michigan. Because Ohio State at basically every other position has some kind of advantage, whether it's star talent, whether it's depth, whether it's pure raw performance, etc. You need Walker to have a big game, like 200 plus rushing yard game, to win. Or you somehow need to exploit Ohio State's secondary more than they exploit yours. And that latter option I really don't see happening. So now let's get into my prediction. My prediction here is for this big game of just amazing proportions. I think that Ohio State wins this. And they're favored by 19 points, and that's big. I actually think Ohio State will cover here. And I know Michigan State is better against the spread than Ohio State is. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, I'm not afraid to be wrong. But I think with how Michigan State is often more inconsistent on offense, it's like Michigan State either gets a touchdown or punts the ball or turns it over, from how I understand. There's like no in between. Ohio State either gets a field goal or gets a touchdown. Maybe somehow punt it away. But they have the more consistent offense, the more explosive offense. Defense is slightly better. It would take truly a miracle like 2015 for Michigan State to win this game. And that's just my opinion. If you don't like it, you don't like it. Cool. And if I'm wrong and Michigan State somehow wins, cool. They'll earn even more respect from me as a Michigan fan. That's all I have to say for this video. If you liked it, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Who do you think wins this game? Do you think Mel Tucker pulls out some tricks from his top hat, jumps out to an early lead, and just holds on to it just long enough to beat the Buckeyes? Do you think Ryan Day delivers a bludgeoning of biblical means? Or do you think it's somewhere in between, and Ohio State or maybe Michigan State comes out with a close, gritty win? Tell me down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you around.